Sit down and play the piano, monkey. Show us what tricks you know.
I'm not your pet, sir. I'm here to serve your table, nothing else.
Serve, that's generous. Carrotlets, your trained dog could do your job.
Harrison Cole stood up, swaying, Bordeaux spilling from his glass.
See, this is the problem with your kind. You think putting on a uniform makes you one of us. It doesn't. You'll never be one of us.
I never asked to be one of you.
The whole restaurant heard that. Harrison's face went red.
Oh, she's got a mouth. Then prove you've got hands too. Sit! Play! Now!
She stared at him for 3 long seconds. Then she untied her apron and walked toward the piano. What happened next turned Harrison Cole's worst night into the internet's favorite video. The Belmont didn't have a wait list. It had a gatekeeper, a leather-bound reservation book that said no to senators and yes to whoever dropped 6 figures on wine last quarter. Tanya Parker had worked here 3 years. She knew the rules. Move fast, speak soft, disappear between courses. A black woman in a white apron, invisible by design. Table 9 changed everything. Harrison Cole arrived at 8:15 with 4 business partners and enough arrogance to fill the building he'd just bought across the street. Real estate billionaire, Forbes listed, the kind of man who tipped 20% not out of kindness, but to remind everyone he could. 3 bottles of Bordeaux in, he stopped pretending to be polite. Hey you. He snapped his fingers at Tanya without lifting his eyes from his glass. What's taking so long? You lost or you just slow? Your entrees are 2 minutes out, Mr. Cole. 2 minutes. I've closed deals worth more than your life in 2 minutes. His guests laughed. He liked that. He leaned back and scanned the room until his gaze landed on the Steinway near the far wall. 9 feet of polished ebony. Lid open. Bench empty. The house pianist had gone home an hour ago. Something shifted behind Harrison's eyes. A thought. A cruel, bored, alcohol-soaked thought. Tell you what. He stood up. The chair scraped against marble. I've got a theory. Anybody can play piano. It's just pressing buttons. Even you. I'm here to serve your table, sir. And I'm here to be entertained. He walked to the Steinway, pulled a $100 bill from his breast pocket, and flattened it across the music rack. Where you grew up, this probably covers the light bill for a month. So here's the deal. Sit down, play something, and it's yours. I'm not going to do that. No. Harrison turned to the dining room. His voice lifted, performing now. Folks, I just offered this young lady $100 to play one song. One song. And she can't do it. You know why? He pointed at Tanya. Because where she comes from, they don't have pianos. They have excuses. A woman at table 6 looked away. A man near the window gripped his napkin. Nobody said a word. Gerald Whitfield, the floor manager, stepped forward. Mr. Cole, that's enough. Gerald, sit down. I own the company that owns this building's lease. Don't test me. Gerald stepped back. Harrison turned to Tanya again. Closer now. His breath reeked of red wine and something rotten underneath. You want to know the truth? I brought people like you into my buildings as janitors, cleaners, service workers. You know what none of them ever did? Anything worth remembering. He tapped the piano. So prove me wrong, or go back to the kitchen and accept what you are. The room was silent. 46 people breathing through their teeth. A busboy near the kitchen door had his fist clenched so hard his knuckles went white. Tanya looked at Harrison. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. 6 years of silence sat behind her eyes. 6 years of walking past this piano every shift, feeling the pull, swallowing it. Not tonight. She reached behind her waist. The apron knot came apart in one pull. She folded it once and set it on the bar. Then she walked to the Steinway, pulled the bench out, and sat down. Harrison grinned at his table. This should be good. She adjusted the bench height, 2 inches back, 1 inch up, rolled her shoulders, spread her fingers across the keys without touching them. The grin on Harrison's face flickered, because the way her hands settled, wrists flat, fingers arched at the second knuckle, pinkies curved. That was not guessing. That was Juilliard. The first note of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room like a held breath finally released. The first time Tanya Parker touched a piano, she was 6 years old, and the piano was broken. An old Kimball upright in her grandmother's apartment in West Baltimore. 3 keys stuck. The sustain pedal creaked like a screen door. Half the ivory had chipped off, showing the wood underneath like exposed bone. But when Tanya pressed her small fingers against the keys that still worked, something happened that her grandmother later described to the neighbors as, the room got quieter. She played by ear. No lessons, no sheet music. She heard songs on the radio and rebuilt them on that broken Kimball note by note, the way some children learn to draw by copying what they see. By 7, she could play anything she'd heard once. By 9, she was playing songs she hadn't heard anywhere. Songs that came from somewhere inside her chest, fully formed, as if they'd been waiting for her hands to be big enough. The church found her first. Pastor Whitmore at Greater Grace Baptist heard Tanya playing before Sunday service and stood in the doorway for 11 minutes without moving. The next week, he put her on the choir piano. She was 10. The oldest member of the choir was 68. Nobody questioned it. Then came Dr. Elaine Crawford, a retired concert pianist who volunteered at a community center in Sandtown. She heard Tanya play a Debussy piece by ear, Clair de Lune, flawless, and went home that night unable to sleep. This girl, she told her husband, is not talented. Talented is the wrong word. This girl is a once. Dr. Crawford taught Tanya for free. 3 times a week, 4 hours a session. Scales, theory, sight reading, interpretation. By 14, Tanya was performing Liszt and Rachmaninoff at regional competitions. By 16, she had won 4 of them. Juilliard offered a full scholarship when she was 17, youngest pianist admitted to the program that year. Her mother, Diane, rode a Greyhound bus to New York with Tanya's entire life packed into 2 suitcases and a garbage bag. "You're going to play on stages I'll never set foot on," Diane said at the dormitory door. "And that's the whole point of me." Tanya thrived. Professor Eleanor Voss, head of the piano department, called her touch surgical and soulful at the same time, like a surgeon who cries during the operation. She was being groomed for international competition circuits. Agents were circling. A career was forming. Then, a phone call knocked it all down. Diane Parker. Diagnosed with ALS at 44. The disease moved fast. Within 6 months, she couldn't button her own shirt. Within a year, she couldn't hold a fork. Tanya went to Professor Voss's office on a Tuesday afternoon. She didn't sit down. "I have to leave." "Tanya, we can arrange a leave of absence. 1 semester, maybe 2. "It's not a semester. My mother can't feed herself. There's no one else." Voss took off her glasses. Her hands were trembling. "You have a gift that appears once in a generation. If you leave now, the window—" "My mother is dying. The window doesn't matter." She left Juilliard 3 weeks before her junior recital. No degree, no contacts, no safety net. 2 years of caring for Diane, feeding her, bathing her, reading to her at night, playing softly on a rented keyboard by the bedside when the pain made sleep impossible. Chopin. Always Chopin. Diane said Chopin sounded like someone praying. Diane Parker died on a Thursday morning in March. Tanya was holding her hand. The keyboard sat in the corner, untouched from that day forward. After the funeral, Tanya discovered her mother had taken out loans against everything: the apartment, a car she no longer drove, even a life insurance policy that turned out to be worth less than the paper it was printed on. Tanya inherited debt. She also inherited Lily, her daughter, just turned 1, whose father had disappeared 8 months earlier. She moved to Manhattan with a baby, a maxed-out credit card, and a silence where music used to be. The Belmont hired her because she was calm, fast, and never complained. 3 years, double shifts, walking past that Steinway every night like walking past a grave of someone she used to be. She never played, not once. The grief lived in her fingers, and she was afraid that if she pressed a single key, all of it would come flooding out, and she'd never stop. Until tonight. Until a drunk billionaire gave her a reason that grief alone never could. A reason to be angry enough to sit down. Harrison Cole wasn't finished. He stood by the Steinway with his arms crossed, watching Tanya settle onto the bench the way a man watches a dog he's told to fetch. Amused, patient, already planning the punchline. "Look at this," he said to his table. His voice carried across the dining room like he wanted it to. She actually sat down. $10 says she plays Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Douglas Ashford, Harrison's oldest business partner, shifted in his seat. "Harrison, maybe we should just—" "Doug, relax. This is the most entertainment I've had all week. You know how much I paid for our table tonight? $3,000. I deserve a show." Tanya's hands rested on her lap. She hadn't touched the keys yet. Her eyes were on the music rack. Empty, no sheet music. And her breathing had changed. Slower, deeper. The way a diver breathes before going under. Harrison noticed the pause and pounced. "What's wrong? Stage fright?" He walked closer. Close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath again. "Or did you just realize you're in over your head? It's okay. Nobody expected anything from you anyway. That's the nice thing about low expectations. You can never disappoint." A waiter named Jerome, standing near the bar, gripped a bottle of sparkling water so hard his knuckles popped. He was black. He was watching this happen. And he couldn't do a thing about it, because Harrison Cole's company held the building lease, and everyone in the room knew it. Gerald Whitfield stood 6 feet away, frozen between duty and survival. He'd seen Harrison do this before. Not this exactly, but the pattern. Find someone who couldn't fight back. Make them small. Enjoy it. "You know what your problem is?" Harrison said, leaning against the piano's curved side like he owned it. He did, technically. The lease covered everything inside the building. "You people always want respect, but you never want to earn it. Everybody wants a seat at the table, but nobody wants to bring anything to it." He tapped the $100 bill. "I'm literally paying you to show me what you've got, and you're sitting there with nothing." Tanya looked up at him. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. "Are you done?" she said. The room flinched. Harrison blinked. Then he laughed, a single, sharp bark of a laugh that echoed off the marble floor. "Am I done? Sweetheart, I haven't even started. You want to know what I think? I think you sat down because you didn't want to look weak. But now you're stuck. Because you can't play. And in about 30 seconds, everyone in this room is going to watch you stand up, put your little apron back on, and walk back to the kitchen like nothing happened." He paused. And nothing did happen. Because nothing ever does with people like you. Douglas put his napkin on the table. "Harrison, that's enough."
"Doug, if you can't handle dinner conversation, order room service."
Harrison didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on Tanya. "Go ahead. I'm waiting. Play." 3 tables away, a woman in a red dress had tears running down her face. She wasn't crying for herself. She was crying because she recognized what was happening,
and she was doing nothing to stop it.
A man near the window had his phone under the table, recording. He didn't know why yet. He just knew this felt like something that shouldn't disappear. Tanya closed her eyes. She could feel the keys beneath her fingers now. Not touching, but sensing. The way you feel heat before you touch a flame. The muscle memory was still there. Buried under grief, under exhaustion, under 6 years of silence. But there, she thought of her mother, Diane, in that hospital bed, too weak to turn her own head, whispering, "Promise me you'll play again someday." She thought of Dr. Crawford in that community center. This girl is a once. She thought of Professor Voss. If you leave now, the window. Tanya opened her eyes. The window just opened. Her fingers came down on the keys. Not tentatively, not gently. The opening octave of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 rang through the Belmont like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. And Harrison Cole's smile died on his face. The opening octave hit the room like a door slamming in a library. G, then D, then G again, an octave higher. The notes hung in the air, raw, dark, aching, and the dining room of the Belmont went from noisy silence to actual silence, the kind where you can hear your own blood in your ears. Harrison Cole stood 3 feet from the piano. His arms were still crossed. His mouth was still open from the last insult he'd been loading. But the sound coming out of the Steinway made the words evaporate before they reached his teeth, because this was not Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was Chopin. Ballade No. 1 in G minor. One of the most technically brutal pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Concert pianists prepare it for months. Some avoid it entirely because a single wrong note in the opening passage exposes everything. Tanya played the opening passage without a single wrong note. Her left hand moved through the bass line like it remembered every inch of the keyboard. Not from practice, not from sheet music, but from somewhere deeper. The kind of memory that lives in the tendons. The fingers knew where to go the way your feet know the path to the bathroom at 3 in the morning. No thought, just certainty. The melody rose. Gentle first, almost shy. The way someone speaks after years of not talking. Careful, testing, making sure the voice still works. A phrase lifted from the middle register, floated, and settled back down like a leaf on still water. A fork hit a plate at table 4. Nobody picked it up. Nobody even looked. Harrison's business partner, Douglas, had stopped breathing. His hand was on the table, motionless, his wine glass untouched. He recognized the piece. He'd heard it once at Lincoln Center, performed by a soloist who'd trained for 2 decades. What he was hearing right now was better. Harrison's face was doing something complicated. The smirk was gone, but nothing had replaced it yet. His brain was still trying to process the distance between what he expected and what he was hearing. It was like watching someone try to divide by 0. Tanya's eyes were closed. She didn't need to see the keys. She had played this piece 100 times in a practice room at Juilliard with the lights off because Professor Voss believed that sight was a crutch. When your eyes are closed, Voss used to say, your fingers stop performing and start speaking. Her fingers were speaking now. The melody shifted into the second theme, warmer, more lyrical, the part of the ballade where Chopin stops whispering and starts confessing. Tanya leaned into it. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing synced with the phrasing. She wasn't playing the piano anymore. She was having a conversation with it. 6 years of unsaid things pouring out through 88 keys. A woman at table 12 covered her mouth with both hands. Not from shock, from recognition. She didn't know Tanya. She didn't know the piece. But she knew what it sounded like when someone played with that kind of pain. It sounded like watching someone cry without making a sound. The man near the window, the one who'd been recording under the table, slowly raised his phone above the tablecloth. He turned it toward the piano. His hands were shaking. He knew he was recording something that would matter. The middle passage arrived. This is where Chopin planted landmines. 16th note runs cascading through 4 octaves. Crosshand passages that require the left hand to leap over the right. Tempo shifts that punish anyone who relies on counting instead of feeling. Tanya didn't just survive the passage. She owned it. Her right hand sang the melody while her left hand thundered beneath it, and the two voices chased each other up and down the keyboard, like an argument between fury and tenderness. The crystal glasses on the nearest tables vibrated. A candle flame bent sideways from the force of a bass chord. Harrison took a step back. He didn't decide to. His body did it for him. The way you step back from a ledge when you realize it's higher than you thought. Gerald Whitfield stood near the hostess stand with tears running into his collar. He had managed this restaurant for 11 years. He had heard every house pianist who'd ever worked here. He had never heard anything like this. Jerome, the waiter at the bar, loosened his grip on the bottle. His eyes were wet. He was watching a black woman do something that no insult, no $100 bill, and no billionaire could take away from her. He was watching someone remember who she was. The passage crested and broke. Tanya pulled the dynamics down to pianissimo, barely a whisper, and let a single melodic line wander through the upper register like a voice calling across an empty field. The room leaned forward, physically. People tilted in their chairs as if trying to get closer to the sound. Then she paused. 2 beats of silence, her hands hovering, and the middle section of the ballad erupted, fortissimo, both hands crashing down in octave unisons that shook the chandelier crystals above table 9. Harrison Cole sat down, not at his table, on the nearest empty chair. His legs had simply quit. The ballad didn't slow down. It shifted. Chopin wrote the development section like a maze. The melody fractures, reappears in different keys, runs through modulations that most audiences feel before they understand. It's the part of the piece where the composer stops telling a story and starts asking questions. Hard ones. The kind you answer with your body, not your brain. Tanya answered every one. Her right hand carved the melody into the upper register. Clean, singing, impossibly controlled, while her left hand drove underneath with a harmonic rhythm that changed color every 4 bars. D minor to B flat major to E flat. The shifts were seamless, not mechanical, organic, like watching weather change over open water. At table 9, Harrison Cole's guests had stopped pretending this was funny 20 seconds ago. One of them, a man named Philip Reeves, who'd made his fortune in commercial real estate and had never once questioned the social order that put him at the top, was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. Not because he was angry, because he was afraid the sound would stop. Douglas Ashford leaned over to Harrison. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Harrison, do you know who this woman is?" Harrison said nothing. His face was the color of ash. His $100 bill was still sitting on the music rack, vibrating with every chord. He'd meant it as an insult. Now it looked like a confession. A written admission that he'd put a price tag on something he couldn't even comprehend. In the kitchen, the line cooks had stopped plating. Chef Raymond Torres stood in the doorway with a towel over his shoulder, his mouth slightly open. He'd worked at the Belmont for 7 years. He knew every sound this dining room made. The polite clinking, the low murmur of conversations that cost $500 per person. He had never heard it this quiet. He had never heard anything this loud. Tanya transitioned into the recapitulation. This is where Chopin brings the first theme back, but darker, heavier. The same melody, but carrying the weight of everything that happened in the development. It's the musical equivalent of revisiting a childhood home and realizing how small the rooms are. She played it slower than she used to. 6 years ago at Juilliard, she would have rushed this section, too eager, too hungry to prove she could handle the tempo. Professor Voss had always told her, "Tanya, you play like you're running from something. Someday you'll play like you've arrived." She had arrived. The melody sang out over a bed of arpeggios that rippled like water beneath a bridge. Each note was placed, not struck, not hammered, placed, the way you place a word in a sentence when you know exactly what you mean and you're not in a hurry to say it. A couple near the back of the restaurant held hands. They had come for dinner and accidentally walked into a reckoning. The woman squeezed her husband's fingers so hard he winced, but he didn't let go. Across the room, a young server stood frozen mid-step, a plate of sea bass growing cold in her hand. She didn't care. The fish didn't matter. Nothing in this room mattered except the sound coming from that bench. Jerome, the waiter, had put down the bottle. He was standing completely still, arms at his sides, tears tracking silently down his face. He wasn't crying for Tanya. He was crying for every time he'd swallowed his own voice in this room. Every "yes, sir" that tasted like metal. Every smile that cost him something. Tanya was playing the thing he'd never been able to say. The section built, layer upon layer, Chopin stacking harmonies like a prosecutor building a case, each chord a new piece of evidence, each crescendo a step closer to the verdict. The dynamics surged from mezzo forte to fortissimo, and Tanya's entire body leaned into the keyboard, shoulders driving, wrists fluid, every muscle in her forearms engaged. The Steinway responded. This instrument had been played by a rotation of competent house pianists for a decade. Background music, ambient filler. It had never been played like this. It had never been asked to produce this kind of sound. And it responded the way a great instrument does when someone who understands it finally sits down. It gave everything. The tone deepened, the sustain lengthened, the bass notes rumbled through the marble floor and climbed up through the legs of the chairs until people could feel the music in their chests, behind their ribs, in the soft place where words fail and only vibration gets through. Harrison hadn't moved. He was still sitting in that borrowed chair, his body angled toward the piano, his hands in his lap. The posture of a man watching his own house burn down, and knowing he's the one who lit the match. His jaw was clenched, not from anger anymore, from something worse. The slow dawning understanding that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. On camera. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He didn't reach for it. 3 more buzzes. He ignored them all. For the first time in Harrison Cole's adult life, something was happening that he couldn't buy, couldn't control, and couldn't stop. And it was being played by the woman he'd called Nothing. The recapitulation resolved into a brief, tender passage. 4 bars of stillness, Chopin's version of an exhale, and Tanya lifted her right hand for half a second. Just long enough for the room to feel the absence. Just long enough for everyone to realize they'd been holding their breath. Then her hands descended again. And the coda, the final, devastating section of the ballade, began. While Tanya's hands moved through the recapitulation, her mind moved through something else entirely. She was back in that apartment in Baltimore. Not the one with the broken Kimball, the other one. The one she rented after Juilliard. The one with the stain on the ceiling that grew a little bigger every time it rained. Her mother was in the bed by the window. Diane Parker. 46 years old and trapped inside a body that was shutting down one system at a time. ALS doesn't kill you fast. It kills you in order. First the hands, then the arms, then the legs, then the throat, then the lungs. It makes you watch. Tanya fed her mother with a spoon every morning. Soft foods, pureed sweet potatoes, applesauce. The kind of meals you give a baby, given to a woman who used to dance at church socials and carry grocery bags up 4 flights of stairs without stopping.
Play for me,
Diane would say, every evening, the same 3 words. Tanya had a rented keyboard, a Yamaha P125 she'd found on Craigslist for $200. She set it up next to the bed so her mother could feel the vibrations through the mattress when the speakers couldn't get loud enough. She played Chopin, always Chopin, because Diane said Chopin sounded like someone praying, and by that point, praying was the only thing Diane had left. Some nights, Tanya played for 3 hours straight. Not because her mother asked for that much, because if she stopped playing, she'd start thinking. And if she started thinking, she'd realize that the woman who had given up everything to put her on a Greyhound bus to New York was now unable to lift a cup of water to her own lips. Professor Voss called once a month. "Come back, Tanya. We'll hold your spot." "There is no spot. There's just my mother and me." And after? Tanya hung up. She couldn't think about after. After was a country she refused to visit. The after came on a Thursday morning in March. Diane's breathing changed at 4 a.m., shallow, irregular, the sound of a machine running out of power. Tanya held her hand. The skin was paper thin. She could feel every bone. "Mom?" Diane's eyes opened, barely. The effort it took to focus on Tanya's face was visible, like watching someone lift a weight that was far too heavy. "Promise me," Diane whispered. Each word cost her something. "Promise me you'll play again. I promise." Diane closed her eyes. Her fingers twitched once in Tanya's hand, a tiny squeeze, the last voluntary movement her body would ever make. Then the breathing stopped, and the room got so quiet that Tanya could hear the radiator ticking. She sat there for 45 minutes before calling anyone. After the funeral, the silence moved in. Not the absence of sound, the absence of music. It was different, deeper, like a room with all the furniture removed. You could still stand in it, but nothing felt right. Every surface echoed. Tanya tried to play once, 2 months after the burial. She sat at the Yamaha, opened the fallboard, and placed her fingers on the keys. Middle C was right there. She knew it the way you know your own name. She couldn't press it. The grief was stored in her hands. Every note she'd played for Diane, every Chopin nocturne, every lullaby, every 3-hour marathon of sound that kept the thinking away. It was all still in her fingers. And pressing a key would open that door. And behind that door was everything she'd been holding back. And she was not ready. She sold the Yamaha the next week, packed Lily into a stroller, and moved to a studio apartment in Queens. Got a job at the Belmont because they didn't ask about her past, and the tips were good enough to cover daycare. 3 years, 6 shifts a week, walking past the Steinway every night, feeling it pull at her the way a current pulls at your ankles when you stand in a river. Never sitting down, never touching the keys, until a man with a platinum watch and a $100 bill told her she was nothing. And the rage did what grief never could. It put her hands back on the keys. The coda of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 is 4 minutes of controlled destruction. Musicologists call it one of the most technically demanding passages in the entire Romantic repertoire. The right hand plays fortissimo octaves at a tempo that borders on physically impossible. The left hand hammers chromatic bass runs that demand the kind of forearm strength most pianists never develop. The pedaling has to be surgical. Too much, and the sound turns to mud. Too little, and the notes die before they connect. This is the passage that separates concert pianists from everyone else. This is where technique meets nerve, and nerve meets something that can't be taught. Tanya's hands came down like thunder. The first chord of the coda hit the room so hard that a woman at table 3 grabbed her husband's arm. The sound wasn't just loud, it was dense, every note stacked on top of the last, building a wall of sound that pressed against the walls of the Belmont like water rising behind a dam. Her right hand drove the octave passage at full tempo. Not a single hesitation, not a single blurred note. Each octave was clean, precise, devastating, like hammer strikes on an anvil, each one louder and more certain than the last. Her wrist technique was flawless. The motion came from the forearm, not the fingers, the mark of someone who had been taught by masters and had then surpassed them. Harrison Cole was still in that borrowed chair. His elbows were on his knees. His head was slightly forward. From across the room, it looked like the posture of a man praying, but his eyes were open, wide open, and what was behind them wasn't prayer. It was the look of a man realizing that the person he'd just humiliated in front of 46 witnesses could do something he would never, in 1,000 lifetimes, be able to do. She was extraordinary, and he had called her nothing. In front of everyone, on camera, the left hand thundered beneath the melody, chromatic runs that descended through the bass register like footsteps coming down a staircase in the dark. Fast, relentless. Each run perfectly even, perfectly timed, landing on the target note with the kind of accuracy that takes 10,000 hours to build. Tanya had those hours. She had earned them in a practice room at Juilliard with the door closed and the lights off, playing until her forearms burned and her vision blurred, and Professor Voss knocked on the door and said, "That's enough for tonight." It was never enough. Tanya always wanted one more pass, one more attempt at perfection. Voss used to say, "You don't play for perfection, Tanya. You play for truth." At the time, Tanya didn't understand the difference. She understood it now. The truth was this. She was sitting at a Steinway in a restaurant where she carried plates for a living, playing the most difficult passage she'd ever learned, in front of a man who had tried to reduce her to entertainment. And she was winning. Not competing. Winning. The way sunrise wins against darkness, not by fighting it, just by showing up. The coda surged into its final escalation. Both hands in unison octaves, crashing up the keyboard in a sequence that Chopin marked presto con fuoco, fast with fire. Tanya played it with fire. Real fire. The kind that doesn't warm you. The kind that burns the house down and leaves you standing in the ashes. Alive. The crystal chandelier above table 9 was shaking. Not swaying. Shaking. The tiny glass pendants clinked against each other in a rhythm that matched the bass line. A water glass at table 5 vibrated off the edge of the table and shattered on the marble floor. Nobody looked at it. Nobody looked at anything except the woman at the piano. Gerald Whitfield was openly sobbing. He wasn't embarrassed. He was beyond that. 11 years of managing this room, 11 years of watching rich people perform their wealth for each other, and he had never seen this room brought to its knees by someone in a waitress uniform. The final passage. 4 chords. Chopin wrote them like a door slamming. G minor, B flat, E flat, G minor again. Each one a verdict. Tanya struck them with everything she had. The first chord said, "I am here." The second chord said, "I was always here." The third chord said, "You just refused to see me." The fourth chord, the final, devastating G minor, rang through the Belmont for a full 7 seconds. It climbed up the walls. It rattled the brass sconces. It vibrated through the marble floor and into the bones of every person sitting in that room. Then, silence. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting to clap. This was different. This was the silence of 46 people who had just witnessed something that they would never be able to adequately describe to anyone who wasn't there. The silence of a room that understood it had been standing in the presence of greatness, and had almost let a man destroy it. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then a chair scraped back. Douglas Ashford stood up. His hands came together. Once. Twice. Then faster. Then someone at table 12 stood up. Then the couple in the back. Then Jerome at the bar. Then the line cooks in the doorway. Then every single person in the Belmont was on their feet, applauding, and some of them were crying, and a woman near the window was shouting, "Brava!" with her hands above her head. The standing ovation lasted 90 seconds. Tanya sat at the bench. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Tears ran down her face in 2 straight lines, and she didn't wipe them. She didn't need to. These weren't tears of sadness. These were the tears of a woman who had just kept a promise. Harrison Cole was the only person in the room who didn't stand. He sat in that borrowed chair with his hands between his knees and his eyes fixed on the floor. The $100 bill was still on the music rack, untouched. Nobody picked it up. It stayed there, a monument to misjudgment. The video went up at 11:47 p.m. The man near the window, his name was Kevin Brady, a 34-year-old software engineer who'd been at the Belmont for his wedding anniversary, posted it to Twitter with a caption that took him 15 minutes to write. He kept deleting and rewriting because nothing he typed felt big enough. He finally settled on 12 words. Billionaire tried to humiliate a waitress. She played Chopin instead. Watch. By midnight, the video had 10,000 views. By 2 a.m., it had 200,000. By the time the sun came up over Manhattan, it had crossed 4 million and was still climbing. The comments came in waves. The first wave was outrage. People identifying Harrison Cole, tagging his company, tagging his board members, tagging every brand that had ever partnered with him. The second wave was awe. Classical music professors, concert pianists, music critics breaking down Tanya's technique frame by frame. A pianist at the Royal Academy in London tweeted, "I've watched this 9 times. Her control in the coda is world-class. Whoever this woman is, she belongs on every stage in Europe." The third wave was the one that mattered. Ordinary people. Parents, teachers, night shift workers. People who had never listened to Chopin in their lives, watching a woman in a waitress uniform play a grand piano in a restaurant full of people who had underestimated her, and feeling something they couldn't name. The video made grown men cry on their lunch breaks. It played in break rooms and barber shops and hospital waiting areas. It became the thing people sent to their sisters and mothers and daughters with the message, "Watch this." Harrison Cole woke up at 6 a.m. to 43 missed calls. His publicist, his lawyer, his CFO, 3 board members, 2 journalists, his ex-wife, his publicist again. The calls had started around 1 a.m. and hadn't stopped. His name was trending. Not for a deal, not for a building. For a video in which he called a black woman nothing and told her that her people don't have pianos. His PR team released a statement at 8 a.m. Mr. Cole deeply regrets any comments that may have caused offense during a private dinner. He has the utmost respect for all individuals, regardless of background. The internet ate it alive. May have caused offense. Private dinner, regardless of background. Every phrase was dissected, mocked, turned into memes. A comedian with 6 million followers posted a video reading the statement in a baby voice. It got 12 million views in 4 hours. By noon, the first domino fell. Meridian Capital, Harrison's largest institutional investor, announced it was reviewing its relationship with Cole Development Group. By 3 p.m., the review was over. They pulled out. $210 million in committed capital, gone in a press release that was 3 sentences long. By the end of the day, 2 more investors followed. A luxury hotel chain canceled a licensing deal for Harrison's name. A charity gala removed him from their honorary board. His Wikipedia page was edited 14 times in 6 hours. Harrison Cole didn't make a public appearance for 11 days, but Tanya Parker's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, and it didn't stop for a week. The first call was from Juilliard, not the admissions office, the president, Dr. Samuel Whitaker. He'd seen the video at midnight and watched it 3 times before calling his department heads. By morning, they had drafted an offer: full scholarship to complete her degree, retroactive credit for her previous coursework, and a dedicated practice studio. No conditions, no strings. Ms. Parker, I'm not calling to offer you charity, Whitaker said. I'm calling because we made a mistake letting you leave, and we'd like to correct it. The second call was from an old number she hadn't seen in years. Professor Eleanor Voss, 71 years old, retired, living in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with 2 cats and a Bosendorfer she still played every morning. Voss had seen the video at 3 a.m. because a former student texted it to her with one word: watch. She watched it. Then she watched it again. Then she sat at her Bosendorfer and played the same ballada, slowly, quietly, in the dark, because she needed to feel what Tanya had felt. She called Tanya at 9 a.m. I told you, Voss said. Her voice was shaking. 15 years ago, I told you. You are a once. Tanya couldn't speak. She held the phone against her ear and let the tears come. The third call came Monday morning. The New York Philharmonic. They were hosting a special concert series celebrating underrepresented voices in classical music. They wanted Tanya as a guest soloist. The fourth call came Tuesday. Atlantic Records, A&R division. They'd never signed a classical pianist before, but they'd also never seen a video get 40 million views in 4 days. They wanted a meeting. Tanya asked for 48 hours to think. She sat in her apartment in Queens with Lily on her lap, looking at a phone full of messages from people she'd never met, offering her the life she'd walked away from 6 years ago. Lily was drawing with a crayon on the back of a takeout menu. She looked up at her mother and said, Mama, are you going to play the big piano again? Tanya looked at her daughter, looked at the phone, looked at the window where the morning light was doing something she hadn't noticed in years, making everything look possible. Yeah, baby, she said. I think I am. 6 months later, Tanya Parker stood backstage at Carnegie Hall and couldn't feel her hands. Not from cold, from fear. The same fear that had kept her from pianos for 6 years. The fear of feeling everything at once. But she'd learned something at the Belmont. It wasn't too much. It was exactly enough. The Isaac Stern Auditorium seats 2,804 people. Tonight, every seat was full, sold out in 11 minutes. Her video had crossed 90 million views. Time magazine had put her face on the cover. The waitress who played back. She peeked through the curtain. Third row center, Professor Eleanor Voss, silver brooch, perfect posture, the same one she wore to every recital for 30 years. 12th row, Gerald Whitfield, navy suit, new, slightly too big in the shoulders. He kept adjusting his cuffs. Front row, Lily, 7 years old, 2 braids, white ribbons, new dress. She held the program in both hands, tracing her mother's name with her finger. A stagehand knocked. 5 minutes, Miss Parker. She looked in the mirror. 6 months ago. Apron, plates, $100 bill on a piano. Now, Carnegie Hall. She'd heard Harrison Cole was selling his penthouse. Lawsuits piling up, discrimination claims, a wrongful termination suit from a janitor named Curtis Williams who'd refused to clean Harrison's office at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. The dominoes were still falling. Harrison was learning what his money had shielded him from for 53 years. Actions have echoes. Tanya didn't feel satisfaction. She didn't feel anything about Harrison anymore. He had been the match, The fire was hers. She walked onto the stage. The applause started before she reached the bench. 2,800 people standing. She hadn't played a note. They were already standing. She sat down at the Steinway, a Model D, just like the Belmonts, but this one had been tuned for her. She caught Voss's eye. The old woman nodded once, slow, and Tanya understood everything in that nod. Pride, vindication, permission. Chopin, Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece, the only piece that could open this night. But different now. Free. The first note rose into Carnegie Hall. That same G, that same held breath. And Lily, in the front row, smiled. She didn't know Chopin. She didn't know what a ballade was, but she knew her mother's sound. She'd heard it through apartment walls, through closed doors, through the thin speakers of a rented keyboard pressed against a hospital mattress. She knew that sound the way you know your own heartbeat. Tonight, 2,800 strangers learned it too. What would you have done if you were Tanya that night at the Belmont? Drop it in the comments. I read every one.
$100 bill on the music rack that was supposed to be an insult. It became a confession, a man putting a price on something he couldn't comprehend. 6 years, Tanya walked past that Steinway every shift and never touched it. Rip couldn't bring her back to the keys. Love couldn't, not even a promise to her dying mother could. But a stranger pretended, and that's the truth nobody wants to hear. Sometimes you don't turn to who you are through healing, you return through fire. Harrison Cole thought he was imposing her weakness. He detonated her strength because talent doesn't disappear when I bury it. It waits, and when it comes back, it doesn't whisper. It feels Carnegie Hall. So here's what I need you to stick with tonight. What I harder, a gift that be silent, or the silence itself. And if someone stood in front of you right now and told you you were nothing, would that destroy you? Or would it remind you of everything you've been afraid to be? Rub your answer below. I read everyone. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Because sometimes what the world try harder to silence is exactly what you need to hear.